Are going through the letter of 2 John this morning. We've just finished up working through 1 John, taking some really good time through that for the last number of weeks. So today we'll be covering the whole book of 2 John, the entire thing. So hopefully you all have the text in front of you. As has been our custom, we'll take a few minutes at the beginning here of awkward silence for you to work down through the text and read it, mark it up a little bit with whatever writing utensil you have. If you want a colored pencil, I've got plenty here. Things I want you noting, as usual, anything, most important is anything that jumps out to you as interesting or meaningful or impactful to you. And then something else I want you to note is things that you see that are similar to something you've read just recently or studied in the book of 1 John. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of similarities. There's going to be a couple little contrasts. So I want you to note anything that is kind of connects back or compares to the book of 1 John. And then anything you see, especially as something that's new, that you don't remember seeing in 1 John, that you see in 2 John here. So we're going to take about 5 minutes. I'll let you kind of read down, work through this short letter here. And we'll reconvene and read it aloud together and study it this morning. right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and read down through this aloud, and then we'll work down through the text. 2 John, we'll read down through the whole book. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing to you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you. So, as this is a new book from, or a new letter from what we have been studying, a couple just initial questions before we really dive into it. But number one, who is writing the book? The elder. Yeah, so here he titles himself the elder, and you'll notice that he doesn't say the elder, I, John, or anything like that. So what do you think, probably, other than just the idea that kind of from the very beginning this has been attributed to the Apostle John, what else about this is pretty strong evidence that this is John's writing?
Its similarity to other of John's writing.
Yeah, so not only the writing style, which we're going to notice as we work down through, the subjects he talks about, the specific words he uses to talk about those subjects, not only connecting to the Gospel of John, but back to the letter of 1 John. So that is, I would agree with that. And who is the letter to?
It says to the elect lady.
Yeah, so to the elect lady and her children. Anybody have thoughts on what in the world that means? Yeah, Ed.
I think that it's clear that refers to a specific congregation and its members. You might puzzle about that, except by reading the rest of that verse that says, I love them, but not only I, but all who know the truth. And all who know the truth aren't going to be lovers of some specific obscure woman and her children.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that's my understanding of this as well, that this is kind of stylistic and or code language in a way to speak about the specific church that he is writing to. And, you know, you get the idea that he is writing from wherever he is in the church that he is at, and you get that at the very end, the children of your elect sister greet you. So kind of this, you know, it would be, unless he just happens to be living with this woman's sister and, you know, this is really, really specific kind of thing. I kind of doubt that that's the case. But rather that this is, you know, kind of personifying the church in that way. And we see the church referred to as a woman and its children in other places in the Bible. And so I think that makes sense. I think the only other option is that it would be literally a lady and her children, but I think that doesn't exactly make sense with the rest of the teaching here. So now I want to kind of ask the question, before we get to, usually we start with what was interesting or jumped out at you, but I want to kind of work through first and ask you, what are the similarities that you note between things he says or words he uses, anything like that, with from 2 John to 1 John? Yeah, Byron.
Verses 5 and 6. I'm sorry. Now I ask you, lady, not as though I were writing to you a new commandment, but the one which we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you heard from the beginning, that you should walk in it. That could almost be a quote from chapter 2.
Absolutely. And a quote from 1 John chapter 2 could also be a quote of what else? Yeah, John 13. So just straight back to the Gospel of John, in Jesus' own words, that when he was speaking to the disciples, the apostles in the upper room. And so that is one of the really strong links that, okay, all right, this is the same guy writing about this, and also driving home this really similar point. We saw kind of the paradox in 1 John. It's a new commandment, but it's also not a new commandment, in that we had it from the beginning, but also it's a new commandment in that it is to a different or fuller extent now that we have seen the crucifixion of Jesus, that we've seen the love that God had for us. This love that we're supposed to have for one another has taken on a new level and a new meaning. So yeah, that's definitely one of the really strong connections there. What else do you notice as similar?
The word abide, a number of times, abide in love, abide in truth, abide in God.
Absolutely, and we saw that all through the book of 1 John, the idea of abiding, of remaining, of continuing. There's so many things kind of packed into that word that we've talked about, and ultimately that's the discussion throughout these books, because you have those that abide, as in those that are remaining, those that are still within the truth, and contrasted with those who have done what? Gone out. Yeah. So that's kind of the contrast you see through both of these books, is us abiding in the truth versus those who have gone out. What else do you see as similar? Yeah, Wes.
1 John, we talked about in chapter 4, the test, the threefold test. Prior revelation of Jesus came in the flesh, worldly wisdom, obeying followers, and listening to the apostles' teaching. And then here we have at least two of those, that Jesus came in the flesh, verse 7, and then we have this teaching of Christ that they've been part of. So there's kind of still this test of like who's really in Christ is reflected here.
Absolutely. And on that note, sounds kind of like he's talking about the same people, right? The same type of false teachers. He uses the exact same words for them. In 1 John, he says, they are trying to deceive you. And here he calls them deceivers. And then what other word do we see here describing them that was only seen in one other place, which is which is 1 John? Antichrist. Yeah. So somebody tell me a little bit about what does that word mean?
Those who oppose Christ.
Yeah, so Antichrist, those who are against Christ. And anybody that was here for 1 John, kind of the unpacking of that, what is Christ meaning?
Anointed.
Yeah, the anointed one. This is the kind of Greek word for the same word that we would use for that Messiah word, the one that was prophesied to come. That would be this anointed one. And his point throughout all this is that Jesus is this anointed one, and he labels these people as anti the anointed one, and so that's a big similarity there. What else do you notice as being the same or similar? I think those pretty well hit the big ones. And we'll notice a couple of others as we work down through. But now I want to ask, what do you notice as different or contrasting or kind of a new teaching in this letter compared to 1 John? And not necessarily just a different teaching, but even just the structure of it. Yeah, Byron.
9 through 11, I think, while false teachers are identified and we are to test them, and 1 John 4, 9 through 11 says you're not even supposed to receive them or greet them. And that was not revealed in the first letter.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is kind of a brand new thing that he says here at the end. Don't receive them into your house. Or give him any greeting, and for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked work. So that is something we did not see him say in 1 John that we do see here. It kind of takes it to another level. What else do you see? Yeah, Ed.
The Calvinists may not be big on this letter. In verse 4, he talks about some who are baptized believers who aren't walking in the truth. In verse 7, he talks about the possibility of losing our full reward. And in verse 9, he talks about the necessity to abide in the teaching. So all of that suggests the possibility that a person has some choices to make.
Absolutely.
And one other thing about verse 4 is sobering to note that in this congregation that he's writing to, as well as I'm sure modern congregations, there were some who were card-carrying members on the directory there every Sunday who were not walking in the truth.
Yeah, and that is definitely, I think, all of those good points there. There's definitely, and maybe even more obviously here than in 1 John, this idea that you can abide or you can go out. You can stay within the teaching of Christ, within the belief and confession of Jesus Christ as the Father's Son, or you can reject that. And you do have the idea that you have people who were, in the pew right next to you who went out and onto this different teaching. So I think all of those really good points there. What else? Anything else you notice as different? What about specifically about the structure? Yeah,
There
Byron.
was one thing that stood out to me. It's not necessarily structure, but verse 3, Paul would always say grace, mercy, and peace to that congregation. But here John says grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ. And so he's including himself in what would, of Paul's letter, would be a blessing on the people. But in this case, he's like, we're all blessed by this.
Well, and on that note, this idea, grace, mercy, and peace will be with us, is a lot different than blessing or this benediction of may grace, mercy, and peace be with you. And does that connect to an idea that we've talked about so far with kind of John's goal in his writing? He doesn't say may it be, he says grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father. And I think that connects to this idea of the confidence that he is building in his audience, that they do have these blessings in Christ, they have attained to eternal life, etc., etc. You do have this paradox between he is writing this to build in them confidence that they do not need to be doubting their having eternal life or the knowledge that they have, yet at the same time a warning that if they go on from this to a different teaching about Christ, you would no longer have that. So that was one thing that I noticed as really interesting, is that tense there is different than we usually see. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God. What do you notice as different about this introduction to the letter versus the introduction to 1 John?
just there's a proper sanitation.
Absolutely. So the quote unquote letter of First John does not follow typical kind of Roman letter format. And so you almost get the idea that First John is almost like a sermon or a teaching pinned down and sent around. Whereas you get the idea from this, okay, the elder to the elect lady and her children, more like this is kind of the typical letter that we expect to see in this time period, where one person is sending this letter and this teaching to a specific people. What else kind of clues you into the fact that he is writing this to a specific group?
He wants to visit.
Yeah. He's like, hey, I'm not gonna talk about this more because my plan is to go see you face to face, so that our joy may be complete, and so that it would be kind of hard to be like, okay, generally everybody, I'm hoping to go see you. So that was the other big contrast that I saw between the two letters is you see one being kind of general, almost like just a teaching or a sermon that's been written down and circulated, whereas this is written to a specific people. Another thing, the fact that he taught them to this idea of not taking into your house or greeting these false teachers kind of gets the idea that he didn't necessarily say that to everybody, not that it couldn't be applied to all. However, wherever these individuals are, he's expecting these false teachers to be coming about, and he gives them specific teaching on how to react to them when they come. Anything else that jumped out to you as different from 1 John? Good, because that hit the ones that I saw. So, so now I want to see and hear from you what jumped out to you as interesting or meaningful or impactful from the letter as a whole. Yeah, Ed.
Maybe verse 10 makes us think about our responsibilities not to be accessories in whatever way that might be possible. He gives examples here, but there's probably a lot of ways that we can support further the teaching of false doctrine, and we need to look out for that. Not even good intentioned actions that really end up supporting false doctrine.
Yeah, and kind of to jump down and zero in on this, since you bring it up, our understanding of hospitality and greeting is probably a good bit different than theirs was. What in that day and age, what is receiving into your house and giving a greeting to somebody meaning? Yeah. So number one, okay, if you have a teacher that's traveling around, say even one of the apostles or another teacher that's traveling around, are they coming into town and staying at the Best Western? No. Number one, in that day and age, any kind of inns or places like that were not places that a teacher of the gospel would be going into. They weren't like how we have, can go stay at a hotel here. Those were not places that a godly person would go into. So in that day and age, receiving into your house is the idea that you brought them in, you fed them, they stayed in your house for probably a good bit of time, because if you're journeying, that can take weeks, and you're going to recover from that, and you're being fed and probably given money, and all of these other ideas kind of surrounding the idea of receiving into your home that are not exactly quite as, that are a lot stronger, I guess, than how we would understand it nowadays. Yeah, Byron?
And I was going to say to add that, first of all, they would be operating from your house because they'd be there so long for a specific purpose, but I think when you look at 1 Peter 4, hospitality is commanded and encouraged as a response to persecution. So Christians in general would have to stay with other Christians, and you would need to provide for them. It would be really striking to the community if someone purported to be a Christian and Christians would not receive it. We say there's some kind of problem, whereas you really are giving an endorsement if you let them stay with you that yes, they are true Christians.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that kind of hits the nail on the head with that. You're not going to let this person who's teaching falsehood about the identity of Christ operate out of your basement. It's going to in the work that they're doing and supporting them in that way. And we'll get to that a little bit more. Also recognizing that this kind of strong language about what they were to do and how they were to treat them, this is about, is this about a difference of an opinion on, how to set up the pews in a congregation, or how many songs should be sung, or what time we should meet, or things like that can fall, that aren't as weighty. What is this false teaching about with them?
Christ's not even coming in the flesh.
Yes, this is about the reality of the incarnation. Like, that is the false teaching that they're giving here. This is not, some of the things that churches have probably split over the last, 30 to 50 years or whatever over. This is about the identity of Christ. This is the very foundation of the gospel. And that's not to say that there aren't other things that could make you take fellowship away from a brother, or have to kind of take these steps to not have anything to do with their teaching. But I think it's important that we think about that and how we apply this, because this is kind of the core foundation of the entire gospel that they are teaching a different religion on, not something that can be boiled down to differences in interpretation or opinion and that kind of idea, that it probably ends up being applied to more than this kind of thing. Yeah, Shane?
Well, it seems like this person has a reputation for it, that they know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because this isn't just someone that just kind of walked in and then, maybe had some questions. This is a person that's known about it, been teaching about it, and you're just extending participation in that. And, the way that this text can be used too is almost kind of like we have to go through and be inquisitors with every single person. We've got to, run an inquisition with every single person that comes in, and then even do that in other churches. But that doesn't really seem to be the idea that he's describing here. Here's a person that has a well-known reputation in something that is absolutely critical to the faith, and you're just going through and saying, hey, come on now. Everything's fine, and you're participating with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because we can end up applying this to kind of in error to situations that probably should involve, hey, let me have you over to my house and let's eat and study about this. These are people that are beyond that. They have already been in the church, and they have changed their ways in their teaching, and they have gone out from it, and they are making probably a living in a practice of going around and teaching this false doctrine. Not somebody moves into town and walks in and they have a different understanding about something with the church, and you graciously and rightfully, I believe, study with them and work with them, and don't just write them off as not a believer and not a real Christian right off the bat, and this kind of idea. And I think this is a pretty different kind of thing that he's talking about here. And I was listening to one lesson. Somebody in the class had asked, well, does that mean the Mormon comes to my door and I just slam the door in his face? I don't want to give him a greeting or receive him into my house or something like that. Again, don't think that's the case there. However, are you going to bring them into your house and let them work out of your house and live, rent-free in order to evangelize the community that you're in? Probably not. I think that would fall under this category. However, I don't think this is a prohibition to give a glass of water to the person that comes to your door and sit and talk with them as you see fit in that kind of way. Anyway, any other thoughts on the end here? We kind of jumped ahead a little bit, and let's ask the question again. What else jumps out to you as interesting or impactful, meaningful from the letter as a whole? Yeah, Christine.
12 is, it's such a valid admonition to us today as well in the generation of texting and email and things like that you have to be very careful about what you put in writing because you can't hear tone, you can't see facial expression, you can't really feel love. You can express it, but you don't really know how it's being received. So that when you are giving admonition or teaching or opening a conversation, that you have to be, it's not wrong to write it down, but be careful not to just go on a rant, because that has the potential to have significantly less impact, which is what he's saying. Like, he has a lot to say about this, but he doesn't want to do it in writing. He wants to make sure that there is connection and communication in that.
Absolutely, and I think that's such a good point, and one that I hadn't really. Thank you for bringing that up, because I hadn't really thought about that as being something that we can learn something from. But that's absolutely true. I mean, I know I've been guilty of. But how many times have you gotten an email that was sent out or sent to you, and it's definitely true of me, and very rashly and quickly wrote out a strongly worded response and fired it back off. I definitely have. I'm very guilty of that. And how often, though, do we get so fired up and riled up about something that we receive in writing, a text, or an email that is just not that way at all when we actually get face to face and actually speak to somebody? Okay, like, hey, I'm giving you this overview, which you could almost see this as like a summary of the book of 1 John in a lot of the teaching, but hey, I'm going to come to you and we're going to talk about this more. Byron and then Shane here.
I think there's something here for us that is really important. The idea, sometimes when someone says that, when we do encounter someone who is teaching false doctrine, the immediate counter reaction to that is that when we follow the scripture, that you don't love that person. And yet, here's John talking about love and who we should love, and he still makes this admonition to not be someone who aids false teaching and false doctrine. So I think that we need to understand that standing up for the truth and working in the way that God describes to work is an act of love. Now, sometimes we can get our attitude out of line, like I'm personally taking vengeance on this person. That can happen, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. And I doubt John would respond well to our modern way of thinking of, well, you can't do that because you got to love the person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
He would say, well, being lost is the ultimate act of not loving a person. So
I think that's right. Thank you for that point. Yeah, Shane.
I was thinking more with what Christine was, in important to understand the written word always comes across more negative, and you always assume negative. You have to intentionally think positively when you go into that. And I just wonder, when I look at this, there's so many, I just think about the Brotherhood papers that have gone in the past, about all of that writing back and forth, and even on Facebook, the things that are said back and forth over and over and over again. Would you say that to them in person, first off? And second off, how much of this would have been solved had people actually sat down at a table with a Bible or over a meal and actually worked through their specific questions and could actually ask questions in response and say, hey, I just don't fully understand what you're saying. Or can you explain that? Can you give detail on that? And what's being said here is there are some things that cannot be discussed and be fully handled in a written format. It has to be done face to face. It has to be done in person. And what he's doing is writing something very quickly that has to be dealt with, and he's got to get that because it's faster than him being there. But he knows there's something further that has to be done. And there's just a really, really critical point there for so many of the things that cause division and problems in our relationships.
Absolutely. Thank you for kind of bringing that point home. And ultimately, one thing I noticed in verse 4, you see that he already rejoiced greatly finding some of their children walking in truth. However, sending this letter off to them is not in and of itself making his joy complete. Like, that I have to see you in person so that our joy may be complete, and that is a kind of my term there. Some translations will say our joy, some will say your joy, but the idea there is my joy, and our joy. Like, it is the collective joy that we all have here, and that is going to be brought about by me meeting you face to face and discussing this. I think that is really important, because we often can hear of a brother, so-and-so is questioning about this or that thing. And you just immediately assume motives on that, or that they're like these false teachers who are going around saying that Jesus isn't the Christ. When really, if you sat down and spoke with them, you probably agree on more than you disagree on. And I think those are all important takeaways from this. Anything else that just jumped out at you as meaningful? So I want to take the kind of the introduction here. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. Any repeated terms that you see that kind of brings that 1 through 4 as kind of a section together? Yeah, so you see the word truth repeated 5 times, I think, if I counted right. And that kind of brings this whole thing together. This is a discussion centered around truth. Having already studied 1 John and the Gospel of John, and then reading down through the rest of the letter, what is that truth that he's talking about there?
Jesus came in the flesh.
Yeah, that Jesus came in the flesh, that he is the Messiah, the Anointed One, and that he is the Son of God, that he is the Father's Son. And so that ultimately, that is the truth that is binding these people together, that they abide in together, that they will be in forever, and that leads to them having this grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love, and this whole idea there. Jumping into verse 4 there, Ed kind of commented on this some. What do you think about that statement? I rejoice greatly to find some of your children walking in truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. What do you think he means by that?
It may be foreshadowing what he was about to discuss, is he knows that a lot of them aren't willing to tolerate these people, but maybe there's some that are willing to have them in. And if they are participating with these false teachers, they're actually not walking in the truth. He's writing this to stop that.
Yeah, so kind of two ways to understand this, because it is kind of ambiguous. Either he is making a distinction here, some of your children are walking in truth as opposed to those other ones. Or it could also be seen as just, he has received some evidence or found some of their children walking in truth. Not necessarily that, oh, the rest of them, though, are not, but rather, hey, I've seen evidence of some of your children walking in truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. Not necessarily, I met one of your kids and they're great. That doesn't mean the rest of your kids are terrible. So I think that can be taken a couple of different ways, but both can go along with the teaching that we see here. This definitely could be the idea that some are, but maybe some are a little bit too sympathetic to these false teachers, or maybe some are these false teachers. Yeah, Dan.
And then later in Revelation, where John is getting the visions with Pergamum, I have some things against you because you have people there who hold to the doctrine of Balaam. You have those who hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, and Thyatira also was permitting these false teachers.
Yeah, so that definitely would go along with what we see in Revelation, where you could have some that are walking in truth in this church and some that maybe are holding to a different doctrine.
As far as some of your children, I guess I just have a question. Do we know for sure that is this their children that they had, their fleshly children, or are these people that they have converted that are called children in other places?
I think in the context, he's more talking about members of this church, people who are of this idea of the elect lady and her children, which I do believe is referring to a specific church. So I think whatever he's saying, he's received some level of evidence that, and enough to make him rejoice, at least that a part of their congregation or this church is walking in the truth. I tend to think that that's just hey, I have seen some evidence of this or heard talk of this, that have spoken well of some of the church there, and that goes along with this idea that he hopes to meet them and see them face to face, so his joy, or so their joy can be complete. So I would kind of take this as the idea, hey, I rejoice because I've already seen some of your churches is really great. They're walking in the truth. And I want to be there so I can work with you and teach and our joy be complete in that way. But definitely a couple different ways that can be taken. And then we drop down and we see kind of the threefold repetition of this word commandment in 5 and 6. Not as though I'm writing you a new commandment, but one you have from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, that you should walk in it. So, as we've already said, this is kind of borrowed straight from 1 John. But the idea, though, in the context and how John talks about it, what are the commandments that we are supposed to walk in? We're all in relation to, in the context of how John has spoken so far.
So love one another.
Yeah, that loving one another. You over and over again, or here and back in 1 John, you kind of see this paradox where it's like on top you said, this is my commandment, and you draw an arrow down, love one another, and love one another is following that commandment. And so kind of in a cyclical reasoning there, you have this centered around loving one another. We talked a lot in 1 John already about ultimately that is what he is talking about here. And specifically the commands that we are to be following are everything that flows out of loving one another and being sure that we do not hate our brother. And this whole kind of idea. And then it's interesting that he goes right from this admonition to love one another, which is what Jesus had commanded. And what does he say there? What's the word he uses in the beginning of verse 7? deceivers, and then that article right there, or whatever the word is. For is what I'm getting at. So again, we often would separate the ideas of, okay, doctrinal things and then the way we love one another and that kind of idea. However, whatever these people are teaching, the ultimate outcome of their understanding and their misunderstanding of the identity of Christ leads to failing to love your brother. And I think that's an important thing to take away from here. You should walk in at this idea of loving one another. For many deceivers have come out, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ. So you have both the idea that, hey, if you follow that, you are going to end up failing at loving your brother. And we've already seen that these people were not those that were to love their brother or acted and walked in that way. But the kind of integral to all of this is that the understanding of who Jesus is, that he is the Messiah, that he did come in the flesh, that all of these things are true, ends up in us loving our brother the way we should, and that love being perfected in us. And we see, says, these are the deceivers and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves so we not lose what we have worked for. So again, kind of back to our point at the beginning, this is something that you can walk away from. But I think it's important to note that he's specifically talking about walking away from believing in who Jesus is. And the understanding that he truly is the Son of God and truly is the Messiah. Not that he had a little bit different understanding on a hot button doctrinal issue. You know, this is a foundational kind of thing that would cause them to lose their full reward. And then everyone who does not abide in the teaching doesn't have God, and whoever abides in the teaching of Christ has both the Father and the Son. This idea of the teaching of Christ, not only things that Christ taught, but I think more specifically he's talking about the teaching of Christ as in the teaching about Christ, about who the identity of the Christ is. And that's what he's saying you do not need to swerve from. We've already dug into the idea of the greeting, and that kind of takes us through the end of the letter here. So really quick work through that, but so much of it we've already kind of studied in depth through 1 John. So Wednesday night we'll be covering 3 John. So as you can see, got to come having read this, and that'll help us work through the text. And that'll be my last class before Byron picks up and I believe begins Revelation. So look forward to studying with you Wednesday night, and it's been a pleasure to study this with you.